If you've been on the bookish internet, you've probably heard about it on Twitter or on Instagram or even here on Booktube. I feel like no one's really shut up about this book since it was announced, and I'm here for it. The book that sells itself as lesbian necromancers in space, Gideon the Ninth. Gideon the Ninth is the newest novel-length book released by Tor.com. And to set the stage, they give us this lovely back text. It reads, "The Emperor needs necromancers. The ninth necromancer needs a swordsman. Gideon has a sword, some dirty magazines, and no more time for undead bullshit." Which sums up the tone of this book pretty perfectly. Gideon the Ninth follows a character, Gideon, who is kind of the misfit of this like royal galactic death cult thing. Basically how this universe is set up is that there's an emperor who rules over 9 houses. Each of the houses has like a culty necromantic power that's like in and of themselves. So the 9th house, for instance, is really good at raising skeleton like aberrations, I guess. And the other houses have different powers based on like how they raise people, how they interact with magic, the kind of energy they have, different things like that. But the Emperor's basically never seen. He hasn't been seen in years, like decades. And it's super mysterious when suddenly a representative from each house is called to his planet. Gideon, of course, is not the person called. That is a different character, but Gideon is dragged along as a kind of swords person, defender. They're called cavaliers, and they basically exist to fight on behalf of the royal representative. And that is interesting that Gideon gets kind of pulled into this because she hates Harrowhawk, who is the like princess essentially of the 9th house. Hates her a lot. They grew up together, were the only 2 kids on their whole planet, and like, nope, not friends. So she's real rough around the edges, has been trying to escape from the 9th house for literal years, and definitely doesn't want to be there. Harrow has bought Gideon's alliance with the promise of freedom and also a lot of threats. And you can kind of tell because Gideon gets there and she's just like a super dark, broody, says nothing, sore thumb. So everyone's like, who is this person? What are they doing? What's going on here? Because there's a challenge at play at the Emperor's home. Essentially, all of the representatives are there to compete in a giant escape room type situation where the prize at the end is immortal life. So what I can say from the get-go of this is that the premise is really fun. There's kind of always something happening. There's a lot of intrigue and kind of mysterious characters who are at each other's throat, and that part is really enjoyable. I thought that the story was fast-paced. I thought that the characters were generally speaking pretty likable, and like some of the like puzzles that they had to solve were kind of interesting, especially when it starts getting into like who will and will not use what necromantic powers. Like, where does the moral and ethical line of necromancy play out? And Gideon is a really fun narrator to have along. It's fun to see things from her perspective because she's fundamentally an outsider who has to keep the secrets of her house. And so in a lot of ways, she is both having to represent the traditional like power structure, but has a lot of insight and say that runs counter to that, that challenges the way that this world is set up. And so you get both of those sides at once, especially when Harrow, her like companion, is in there, because Harrow's like goody two shoes, goody two shoes. She is kind of the epitome of exactly what you would want from like a necromantic princess. She's like dark and takes herself very seriously and like cruel and punishes Gideon at every turn. So you see both sides of that dynamic, and I think that that is one of the real high points that Muir has done really well. I love the idea of like having to solve puzzles to get to solve a bigger puzzle. I am a big fan of escape rooms. They had a whole puzzle room at Convergence, and that was fantastic. We spent a lot of time there when I was there, so it's like it plays off of those tones for me really, really well. And a lot of the detail in the world building is quite good. Like it feels very vivid and rich, the way that Muir draws this kind of social and political dynamic, the way that she explains how this gigantic building in the middle of this like falling apart planet looks, and how the mysterious ghosty characters come to be. But the book is not without flaw. There are 9 houses with 2 characters from each, and there's a lot of times when that's just too many characters. You're not entirely following all of them very closely, and so sometimes certain characters seem interchangeable in a way that like you could have shrunk that house, like the cast down by a good 5 or 6 people, and it wouldn't have hurt the book at all. There's also, and I would say this is kind of a corresponding problem, where there's not enough time to explore the full intrigue. You can tell that Muir has really like thought through how these, you know, houses and factions play out together, how they interact, but there's not really a ton of time to explore all of that dynamic because there's just so much at play. There are, again, 9 houses, each of which interacts with one another differently. So there's not really time to explore some of the nuances of that. And so you're left kind of like, oh, well, these people are fighting now for a reason. And it's not that those moments aren't still enjoyable, they just don't have the same depth that they could. I think at the beginning of the book, Gideon feels one note, and that's totally fine with me, especially because I think Gideon shows a lot of growth throughout the book. And the character becomes significantly more fleshed out the farther you go, which is exactly what I'd want to see in any book. So the fact that she kind of starts off with this like one-tone humor doesn't really negatively impact the book, but I would say keep an eye out for that. If it, for the first couple pages, feels like, oh man, meh, it gets better. There's also a really interesting dynamic at play that I really, really liked. And that's the dynamic between Gideon and Harrow. Part of what I liked about this, aside from the fact that they kind of play off of one another, and so you see this kind of elite mixed with this very lowbrow sense of what this world looks like at the same time, you also get at the heart of why they're not getting along. And it is fundamentally one of power and structure and abuse of power. As the book continues on, there's a real level of growth and exploration of that dynamic, especially as Gideon and Harrow have to like draw closer together and cooperate more, because it really gets to the heart of the issue. At times with Gideon saying it explicitly, kind of blowing Harrow's mind that all I want is for you to ask. Don't tell me what I'm supposed to do. Give me a sense of like control and agency. I want to be somebody who has say over my own destiny. I think that's one of the real highlights of this book. I'm trying to think of how to talk about this book's ending, because I think that that's one of the points that I liked about it the most, because it brought together a lot of different elements and really it challenged a lot of characters, and at the same time I am so hella mad. So the ending, how do I say this without spoilers? I knew it was going to happen. I knew why it was going to happen. I definitely didn't want it to happen, and now I have to read the next book. So good on you, Tamsyn Muir. Having enjoyed this book, I think, quite a lot. I just wanted to be like, no, not this thing that I totally saw coming. Ah! Give me the next one. It was that feeling. This is like the fall punk rock book that I crave come September. It feels very much like I've pulled out like my combat boots and I'm starting to wear like my black leggings again. And it's very pleasant in that regard. Like it hits those feels well. I do think this is a lot of fun. I would go in with my eyes wide open because, like I said, this is the kind of book that does have flaws and that I think is a little bit, is potentially a little vulnerable to overhyping. That being said, if you go on knowing that, I think you're gonna enjoy this a lot more, and I think you're gonna like it. If you guys are looking forward to Gideon the Ninth, let me know. You guys know the drill. Go ahead and subscribe, comment, like, do all those good things. You can go ahead and follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I am active over there. And if you want, you can go on over to my Patreon, where you can become a patron and get access to early video access. I hope you guys are having a fantastic reading week. Talk to you later. Bye.